Median, is easier than the mean. The mean you have to add individually and divide by the total number of data. By all means, this two item is not difficult, right? It's tedious, right? It's small arithmetic, but it's not very complex in terms that you guys can not handle it. Question with this two items, the mean and the median. All right. So now the last two items we have in terms of 11.3 is the mid-range and the mode. So the mid-range, just like I mentioned last time, the mid-range is basically asks you what is the middle number between the two range, right? Later on we will talk about range, but for now the mid-range is basically asks you what is the middle of your range. So to find the mid-range, all we need to do is take the lowest value, add it to the highest value, and divide it by 2. And the last item we have is the mode, which is the mode is basically what is the data appear up the most frequent, the most time, right? There's no calculation with the mode. So the mid-range, looking at this thing here, based on my information, as you can see, the lowest data I have is 5.2 and the highest data is 6.8. Just once we have this thing here, all I need to do is take the two items, add them up and divide it by 2, which is, as you can see, this is my mid-range, which is 5.2 plus 6.8 is 12. 12 divided by 2 will give me 6. That's all we have, which is, again, the middle of the pack is somewhere here. The middle of the range is 6, right? And again, the other one, which is, if you look at this thing here, the mode, which is, again, if you look at this thing here, what data appear up the most, which is, as you can see, this data is a little bit unique, and that's why I picked this data to show you that looking at this thing here, we have two data that appear up the same amount of time, right? And again, if we have two data appear up the same amount of time, well, we have 2 mode. And if we have 2 mode, we just call this bi, right? So again, because we have 2 data, 5.3 and 5.2 appear up 3 times each, then we have 2 mode, which is, if we have 2, we call them bimodal. If we have 3 mode, then we just call them trimodal. And if you have 4 mode, well, your data kind of not good. Ideally, we want to, ideally your data is the most data is somewhere along the middle, right? This one here is unique in terms that the mode is the 2 extreme low, right? Assumably, ideally your mode is somewhere along the middle of this thing here, along the average, right? We assume that a lot of people or a lot of data is surround the average, the center of everything. Okay, so again, this thing here is a little bit unique in terms that the mode is the back end or the small value. Okay. But again, for instance, like I mentioned earlier at 1, if for instance 5.4 were to change to 5.3, then if you have 4 data in terms of 5.3, then 5.3 will be the mode. Then that will be only 1 mode. Okay. So again, basically the mode is easy. You just glance through your data, whatever appear up the most, that will be your mode. Okay. So again, if you don't have question with the mean and the median, the mid-range and the mode should not be that difficult. The mode is the easiest one. There's no calculation. Just glance through your data. The mid-range, you just add the highest and the lowest, or the lowest and highest divided by 2. Okay. So those 4 items should not give you trouble, right? The median should give you trouble because sometimes you got anxious. You got forgot to put your data in order. That's the only reason that you have median wrong. Okay? So here comes the hardest part of 11.3 is what happens if we want to find the mean of a group of data. Meaning what happens if your data is in this group, right? What happens if this is our data is the mean record of a highest temperature of among the 50 states, right? So we have 50 states, meaning we have 50 data. And we don't want to list each data. We don't have the list of the data individually. We group them in one class, which is, again, the first class, like I mentioned here, which is, again, the first class is between 100 and 104. And there are 3 of them, 3 states have the highest temperature between 100 and 104. We don't know the individual data, but we know that they are in that group. So looking at this thing here, and again, to question? Someone have a question or just say, okay. So one thing about this thing here, which is again, this is what I mentioned last time is, again, looking at this item, we know that we have 7 class, right? We have 7 classes here, which is each class divided into that. And now the other thing is, let me ask you like last time, what is the class width, right? And again, whoever came from the 1 p.m., the class width is 5, right? Meaning again, every time you jump from one class to the next, how many data do you add, right? How many do you increase, which is from 100, you jump to the next one, which is 105, which is we know that the class width is 5, right? Every time you jump from the second to the third, you add 5 to give you 110, so on and so forth. Every time we, from one class jump to the next, we increase by 5 units, meaning each class, the class width is 5 units. Okay, so this is the step, this is the 4 steps that we need to do to find a group, the mean for a group data. Because we don't know the individual data, so we have to, the first thing we need to do is we need to find a midpoint. And the midpoint is just like a mid-range of all of your class, right? So each class, we have to find a midpoint. And once you find a midpoint, this is what we need to do, which is, again, once you find a midpoint, we have to take the multiplication of each of your midpoint times its frequency. And once you time the frequency to the midpoint, you need to add the result up. And then finally, to find the mean, we have to divide by the total number of data, which is, again, the sum of all frequency. In this problem, the sum of all frequency, or the sum of the frequency, is 50, because that's the 50 state we have. Okay, so looking at this thing here, this is your formula, which is the summation, x bar, which is your mean. The summation is the frequency times the midpoint, add each of them up and divide by n. Okay, so again, the f is your frequency, the xm, which is your midpoint of the data of the x, and the n is the total frequency. So looking at this thing here, which is, again, this is the chart you want to create. This is the chart you want to create into saying that, again, looking at this item here, how do I find a midpoint, which is, again, the first class, the midpoint is you take 100 plus 104 to give you 204, divided by 2 to give you 102. So 102, this is your class. You can find the midpoint of the second class by take 105 plus 109, which is 114, divide 114, divide by 2, and you will get 107. But remember earlier, I asked you, what is your class width? And the unique thing about class width is every time you jump from one class to the next, you add 5. So basically, all you need to do is from the midpoint of the first one, you jump to the second one, you add 5. If this thing here, if 107, you jump to the next one, you add 5 to give you 112. You can find a midpoint, but the easy way is every time you jump, all you do is you increase 5 units, because that's your class width. So each time from one midpoint, you just add 5 units. Okay, so basically this is what we have. If you were to, that's what you have, which is, again, each of your class, you need to find a midpoint, which is this point represent that class, represent the whole class. The average of that class is that midpoint. Okay, so once we have this thing here, the next step is we need to take the midpoint, which is 102, times the frequency, which is 102 times 3 to give you 306, 107 times 8 to give you 856, 112 times 16 to give you 1792, and so on and so forth, meaning you take each of your midpoint, you time the frequency. So again, this is what we have to do, which is, again, step 1, find the midpoint. Step 2, find the multiplication of the midpoint times the frequency, or the frequency times